Recently, I've seen this odd spike in people believing that Michael Afton isn't the FNaF 6 protagonist. It's not become a major belief in the community or anything, but I still see it more than I used to, which was never. So I thought I would make this quick video about why Mike is the FNaF 6 player for those guys, but also the only other person it could be. The evidence for Mike being the protagonist mostly comes from death lines. When Molten Freddy kills you, he says, "Together again," which obviously means he knows the protagonist. And since we know Molten Freddy is Ennard, and Ennard obviously knows Mike, it definitely points in favor of Mike being the player. Molten Freddy also has another line. "One big happy family." This makes sense with Mike being the player since FNaF 6 is basically an Afton Emily family reunion. There's also Scrap Baby's line, "It feels like home." Building off of the family reunion idea, it would feel like home because all of her family is there. Her father, her brother, and it's heavily theorized that the bite victim is in Molten Freddy too. And Mrs. Afton, she somehow possesses Ballora. Although some people use Scrap Baby's line, "You're not who I expected to see," as evidence for Mike not being the player, but this doesn't really make sense. We know Baby was already at FFPS at least once before the game started, so she was probably just expecting a random person, not her older brother. Now, I will admit it is a bit odd that Elizabeth kills Mike when it's implied in last game she saved him, with her repeating, "You won't die before Mike gets up," but maybe it was out of loyalty to her father. Another point towards Mike being the guard is that Afton speaks like he knows who the player is. He also taunts the player with the line, "Fascinating what they have become," implying that he knows the player knows who they are, the spirits possessing the animatronics. It also might imply he expects the protagonist to agree with him that it's fascinating what's happened to them, maybe because he sent him to his experiment bunker. William also says this line, "How can I resist a promise such as this?" A lot of people think William is talking about the promise to murder more children, but this makes a little sense since William reveals he knows FNaF 6 is a trap. I think it's more likely William is talking about Mike's promise to find and most likely kill him, maybe even being one of the multiple reasons Afton stays in the building when realistically he should have been able to just leave, since Scrap Baby did at the start of the game. He wants to see just what Mike plans to do. How does he know this? I don't know, I just think it makes sense. Maybe Mike and William met before FFPS, or maybe Mike recorded his speech on an audio log and Afton later heard it. Furthermore, Henry thinks the player wants to die with everyone at the end of the game, which would make sense if he was a depressed man who has been with Freddy since the start and witnessed his family be destroyed by his father's misdeeds, while also most likely blaming himself in some way for everything, and was also a purple corpse. More evidence is that the protagonist is willing to risk their life day after day to keep the animatronics contained in the building, which makes sense with Mike being the player because as hand unit says, Mike has
a genuine disregard for instinctive self-preservation.
Also, Mike being the owner of Freddy's makes sense with his character, as he is a foil to William, and they already have multiple narrative parallels, so both running a Freddy's could just be another one. Mike running a Freddy's also brings his character full circle. He possibly indirectly caused a majority of the tragedies related to Freddy's, but in the end, he manages to run a successful Freddy's location where no one dies. Well, except for two people who wanted to die. Also, Mike being the player is just logical with Sister Location's ending, where Mike says he's going to find Afton, and then Afton jumps on screen, setting up FNaF 6. If Mike isn't the FNaF 6 player, he has to be the FNaF 3 one. And not only that, but he kinda has to die in FNaF 3 during the fire to explain why he isn't in FFPS. Not only is that a worse ending for his character than FNaF 6, but it also doesn't make sense since nothing in FNaF 3 implies the guard dies in the fire. You'd think if he did, the newspapers at the end of the game would have said something. Mike can still be the FNaF 3 guard, although he probably isn't. He must go to FFPS either way though, since, well, everything I just talked about. Also, I don't have an image for this, but apparently in Security Breach there's a Foxy plushie hidden in the walls in the FFPS location. Mike is connected to Foxy for obvious reasons. Now, like I said, I don't have an image of this, so you just have to take my word on it. Finally, in UCN during OMC's dialogue, you can hear this, which sounds like William screaming. It's unknown what exactly he's saying, but what we can make out for sure is Mike, and it sounds like he's either screaming for help or that he hates Mike. Now, let me ask you this. Why would he be screaming to Mike for help if he wasn't one of the last people he saw? And why would he be screaming that he hates Mike unless he blames Mike for the current situation he's in? So yeah, that's all evidence for Mike being the player in FFPS. It's kind of crazy to have to make this video, but honestly, since FNaF 6 tried to keep Mike being the player a secret for some reason, and it's still not technically confirmed, I can't blame people for thinking maybe the real twist is that Mike isn't the player, especially since the last game had a twist of the player too. two twists, actually. First, you thought you were just playing as a random guy, then you were led to believe you were playing as William, and then at the end, you learned no, you were playing as Michael, his son. And speaking of the idea that Mike isn't the player, there's only one other character I could see for being the FFPS player if Scott's just an extremely shitty writer and chose not to have Mike be there when his family is set to rest. Although I guess it does have the benefit of Mike still being around today. Now, that character is Cassie's dad. It's heavily implied that Cassie's dad is not only the Bonnie bully, but an employee at Circus Babies. The evidence is the out-of-place Circus Baby elevator in Princess Quest 4 and one of Baby's lines in Help Wanted 2. I recognize you. In Sister Location, Baby says,
I don't recognize you. You are new.
him working at Circus Babies can explain Molten Freddy's lines. They are together again from the time Cassie's dad worked there. Afton recognizing the player also makes sense since Cassie's dad was his son's friend as a kid. Henry implying the protagonist wants to rest is kinda odd, but who knows? Maybe Cassie's dad does want to rest but just chooses not to, taking Henry's way out. Cassie's dad is also a huge fan of Freddy's, so him running a new Freddy's makes sense. He would want to bring the franchise back. Cassie's dad being manager also makes a little more sense than Mike, honestly, since as a manager Mike would have to, interact with people, which could be difficult as a purple corpse. Also, Cassie's dad envisions the FNaF 6 location at its peak in Help Wanted 2 when he has on the Van Eye mask, perhaps implying that he worked at the FFPS location. Maybe the Foxy plush is just a random Easter egg. Or maybe Cassie's dad is the Fright Guard, and in the logbook, the Fright Guard is represented by Foxy. I don't know, it's just an idea. I think you can make a compelling argument for him being the FNaF 6 player. Well, okay, compelling in quotation marks, because he definitely isn't, unless it was a retcon. Mike being the player just makes more sense, and it's clearly what Scott is going for. I won't even consider it a theory, it's fact. Maybe Cassie's dad worked at the FFPS location since we know Mike wasn't the only one working there. He could be the handyman Mike hires. And yeah, Mike is the FNaF 6 player. I can understand thinking we don't play as Mike in 2 or 3, but saying we don't play as him in FFPS is Michael erasure and I will not stand for it. Let me know in the comments if you think Cassie's dad worked at FFPS since it does make sense and I want to know your thoughts. While you're down there, subscribe and I'll see you guys next time.